Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I am here today with Paul Zeise for our weekly Zeise is Right video on all things Pittsburgh sports, and maybe a few national topics today as well. I'm with Paul, our Post-Gazette sports columnist. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
I'm hanging in there. A lot of topics to chew through today, Paul. The first one I wanted to get into with you was we've had a lot of Bud Dupree talk in the last week. Haven't really gotten to get into it a whole lot on the channel, but there's plenty of reporting suggesting that he may be coming back to the Steelers to kind of help out their pass rushing core. What do you think of do you think that deal is going to get done? We're recording this on Wednesday, so it may be done by the time we're talking. But B, if they do make that move, is it a good one?
Well, from what I understand, it's almost 100% about his physical. If he passes his physical, he's going to get a contract offer. And if he gets a contract offer, he's going to sign it. It's in his best interest, he knows, to come back, to play in a defense he's very, very familiar with, to play with the Steelers, to play, the same position he played when he left. He's obviously very familiar with the area. So there's a million reasons why. Actually, a couple million reasons why he would sign with the Steelers. And I think that it all comes down to, is he healthy? I mean, he's got to pass his physical. That I can't tell you. So anybody that's telling you that it's definitely a done deal, or it's not, a done deal, or this, that, and everything, unless they're the doctor examining him, they probably don't know definitively one way or the other, because from what I'm told, and obviously, back in the day, I used to do the Bud Dupree show, so I know him. I know a number of people in his circle. From what I'm told, it's just a matter of, can he pass the physical, which they tend to believe that he will. But at the end of the day, if he does, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to sign. And I think it's a good move for the Steelers. It gives them depth. This is different than, a couple of years ago where he was a starter. Now he's a swing guy. He can probably go on either side. He's a little bit of insurance for T.J. Watt, who, has had some injury issues or whatever. Situationally, he might be the guy that you put in there in certain situations ahead of Alex Highsmith. And more importantly, we keep talking about this all the time as we get closer to the draft. The big thing is it gives you a position now that you don't have to worry about in the draft. Doesn't mean if somebody comes along, right, that you go, wow, this is a guy we didn't think was going to be available, but you don't have to feel pressure to go get an outside linebacker if you bring him back. And I think that's the most important thing they're trying to get done. Is so clear if you watch what they've done in free agency. They're basically trying to fill a lot of holes, give themselves a lot of depth, give themselves a lot of options, so that when the draft comes, they can pick the guys the best guys they can find, maybe at a couple of key positions. So to me, I think it's a no-brainer with Bud Dupree. Bring him back. Sign him, put him on one of your outside linebacker. Actually, he would be the backup probably to both outside linebackers. And you also have a little bit of insurance with a guy who's played a lot, who's proven he can be productive. If T.J. Watt were to go down for another 3 or 4 weeks or something like that, you've got a guy to plug right in.
Yeah, you think this defense would, because I think that was the big problem last year, is that once TJ Watt was gone, it went kind of from 60 to 0. Is Bud Dupree the type of guy who can keep it maybe running at 30, 45 miles an hour, to use that metaphor?
Well, I mean, I think the thing about it is, if you think about Bud Dupree, what does he do well? There's one thing he does well, Adam, right? I mean, really well, and that's put pressure on the quarterbacks. I mean, he always get a lot of sacks all the time, but a lot of times he was flushing quarterbacks to some other guys to get sacks, because he's still good enough that you have to account for him on the outside. So I think that's the biggest thing, is they're looking for something so that if T.J. Watt were to get hurt, their defense doesn't take such a dramatic fall from, when he's playing to when he's not playing. Not that he's T.J. Watt, but he at least gives you the opportunity to have a pretty productive player at that position.
Also been a lot of safety talk this week, Paul, at the owners' meetings. It's one of the other Steelers' other glaring needs. There's some suggestion that Patrick Peterson could maybe play in some of those spots. Obviously, they have DeMonte KZ on the roster. What do you think of how they're ultimately going to address that? Is that a position you think they might sign somebody for late? Is it something you'd be looking at in the draft, or do you think they have the personnel to kind of fill that Terrell Edmunds void already?
I tend to believe that they're going to sign somebody, right? And then I also think one of those first three spots that they have is going to be a safety. In other words, I think they're going to address it in free agency with a veteran guy who's not a very expensive veteran guy, somebody they'll kick the tires on that, if they need to get rid of them at the end of training camp, it's not going to kill their salary cap. But somebody who might be, still have a little bit of gas in the tank to play. And then the other thing is, I think they're going to go get a rookie, a young guy, to pair with Minkah Fitzpatrick maybe for the next 4 or 5 years. So I really think that that's what they're going to do in terms of how they address it. It won't shock me if they use both of those methods, free agency and a draft choice.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting. One name I've been talking a lot about is Jair Brown from Penn State. I think he'd be available in the range where, the Steelers might be looking for someone like that. And if you can, spend a third and fourth round pick and get a reliable safety for the next 4 to 5 years, you're right, Paul. I think that'd be a great way to address it and have some competition. And again, to go back to your earlier point, some depth at that spot. Paul, we're going to transition into some broader NFL talk. The Lamar Jackson saga drags on. The Baltimore quarterback has demanded a trade. Where do you see this situation ending, Paul? The Ravens are saying they're confident he's going to come back. Obviously, he wants out. Where does this end? Is this kind of Le'Veon Bell like on a higher level? Now because it's a quarterback instead of a running back.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is if he wants to play, the Ravens are probably going to be his best opportunity to play and get paid the money he wants to get paid. That's just the reality of the situation. If you think about it, Adam, in some ways he's nuked all of his value. If you're a team like Miami or whoever, the Colts, I guess, are one of the teams that they're talking about maybe making a trade. I think even the Texans maybe. But if you're one of those teams, that Baltimore now has basically had their hand forced and probably has to trade him. I've used this on my radio show this week a couple of times, but you've heard of the phrase motivated seller, like when you're looking to buy a house, you go out and you hopefully can find a motivated seller, meaning somebody who's looking to sell and really desperate to sell their house, right? And that motivated seller, what happens? You get a pretty good deal. You get a much better deal. You get you get basically because they've got to almost take what you're offering. And that's the same thing here. If you're the Colts, that the Ravens are really, their backs are against the wall. So the Ravens come to you and say, well, we want 3 first-round picks or whatever they're asking for. You basically say, well, tell you what, I got a better plan. We'll give you 1 first-round pick for him, and we'll give you, some lineman, some other, some backup lineman or something, and you're going to take that. And guess what? If you're the Ravens and you're staring at the prospects of having a guy sit out for the entire year or losing him for absolutely pretty much nothing, right? You're probably going to have to come to the table and bargain and deal with getting rid of them or giving them away for less than you want to. And that's really what happens when you destroy or undermine your own value, which is what Lamar Jackson has done.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting saga to play out. And I think, it's especially interesting to Steeler fans. That's why we keep talking about it on here is, what could that do to the AFC North if you have some type of Lamar Jackson holdout, if Lamar Jackson's traded? Where are the Ravens easily the worst team in the division if he's gone?
I mean, I guess it would. Who is? I can't answer that until I know who is going to be the quarterback. If it's Tyler Huntley, not only the worst team in the division, they might be the worst team in the AFC. But let's say that they somehow wheel and deal, and get, I don't know, Bryce Young, or one of those guys, or, I don't even know who's available. Or if they make a trade for somebody who is a sort of a mid-level starter, one of these guys that, or is, I guess Garoppolo is with the Raiders now, right? So he's not available, but somebody like that, somebody who's proven you can win games with, and things of the such, and they run the football bunch and play defense the way they play defense, they can still be a formidable team. Not quite as scary as if they have Lamar Jackson, but by the same token, if the guy don't want to play, the guy don't want to play. So I would basically, I'd bring out the old Mike Tomlin line, which is what? Volunteers, not hostages.
What if they sign Mason Rudolph, Paul?
There we go. Listen, if they sign Mason Rudolph, I would be rooting so hard for whatever the week is that they play the Steelers, that whoever their starter is gets hurt, or I don't want anyone to get hurt. So let's say gets called into jury duty, right? And can't play because he's in jury duty and sequestered for a week. So Mason Rudolph starts and throws for 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. That'll be the most fun week of talk radio I've ever had if that happens.
Yeah, I think it'd be a riot. So it's something to look out for. Paul, I want to switch gears, talk some Pirates now. The season starts today for people watching, Thursday. It's opening day. What do you think of this team, Paul? Do you have a record prediction? And what are some of your reasons for optimism and pessimism about this team?
Well, I think one of the things I've said all week, I really believe. Now, what did they have last year, Adam? 61 wins, right? 61 or 60?
I think it was 62.
62. So they were 62 and 100, correct? Was their record? I really believe. I had somebody on my show the other day call in and say they think 86 wins, which whatever that guy's taking, I really wish I could take some too, because that's insanity. But I do think they can get to 74, 73, 74 wins. I do think that's reasonable. That would be a jump of what, about 10, 12, 14 wins or something like that. That's a pretty big jump from year to year. I mean, people think when you're saying, oh, well, 74, 75 wins, people think, oh, well, you're predicting another bad season. Well, not really. I'm predicting an improvement of about 15 wins, which in baseball, go through every team and see how many improve that much by that much of a percentage, right? From year to year. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to go, and have a 25 win jump or a 30 win jump, But I think that they're a team that can win 74, 75 games. And so, first of all, I know JT Brubaker just went down and is on the injured list. But I actually believe that, and of course, the caveat is always in health. But I actually believe if you look at their rotation, okay, Roansy Contreras, I think he's a chance to be a legitimate pitcher, right? A legitimate and major league starting pitcher. Maybe even, maybe somewhere between the ace and the number 2. Maybe he's not like a top 5 pitcher in the National League. But maybe he is, a guy who is really, really good, top 10, top 12 type guy. Rich Hill, I mean, you look at Rich Hill and you say to yourself, can he give them what Jose Quintana did, where you had an old guy who found the fountain of youth and actually pitched reasonably well? Then the question becomes, well, if that's the case, will he be gone in July like, Quintana was? But to me, I think if you look at Rich Hill, you've got a guy who's a veteran guy who seems to know what he's doing, and obviously is probably eat more innings than you would think for a guy his age. Okay, and you've got Keller, and Keller is the opening day starter. We saw in the second half Keller right there. We saw a guy who maybe was closing in on becoming that guy that they thought he was, or they've acted like he was all the time. I don't think he's quite there. But my point is, you've got, I think, 3 good starters. 3 guys I think you can win games with at your rotation. Now you've got Brubaker, you've got the Velasquez guy, you've got Oviedo, you've got a couple other guys that have, obviously be all thrown in and jumbled up. I just think their rotation is going to be a little bit better. So let's start there. You've got a guy to close games, I think, in Bednar, although, you could trade him in July too, I suppose. But the other part of it is if you look at what they have with respect to their everyday lineup. I mean, we laugh about signings like Carlos Santana, right? But, a guy like that, stable, Andrew McCutchen, those kind of veteran guys sort of stabilize your lineup a little bit, and give you veteran at bats every night. I don't know that it's necessarily that either one of them is going to, light the world on fire with a crazy batting average or a bunch of home runs or anything. But I think if you add two veteran bats like that, two guys that, will stabilize your lineup a little bit, who knows what Cruz can become. You need Brian Hayes to be, A, healthy, and B, capable of doing a little bit better than what he's done at the plate. But for the most part, I think you've got a reasonably stable lineup. I think you've got a pitching staff that probably has three guys that we know will go out there and give you a chance to win, 3 out of 5. And I'm assuming, whoever is the other two, depending on what's going on, with health and all that other stuff. I mean, and you've got at least a really good closer, and I think you've got a couple other good relievers down there. It's not a World Series team, but I do think it's better than it was last year.
Yeah, Paul, I said this on the Pirates preview video with Jason. I'm a little more skeptical than you guys. I think Joe Starkey also wrote 74. Jason's in that same category. I'm going 70. I think this is a deeper team. I think you're not going to go out see guys. And the problem with this team the last 3 years is that you've had a lot of guys go out there that were not Major League Baseball players who, could not handle the jobs. And so you had a bad team. And I think this is a deeper team, so I think it will be better. I don't know how much better. And my big, when picking the win total, my big thing is I think a lot of these guys we're talking about, Paul, are going to get traded by the end, by the deadline. And I think it's going to be similar to 2011, 2012, where things kind of nosedived in August and September. And I think that, maybe they'll be on a 74, 75 win pace, but maybe drop off of that a little bit by the end of the year.
Well, I mean, Rich Hill obviously is a guy who, if he does anything at all, they would be stupid not to trade, unless you're really in the thick of a pennant race and think that, you can get there at the end. He'd be dumb not to trade him if he does anything. Santana, same way. I would say, basically there's a couple of other guys like that. McCutchen, you're not going to trade. I can't imagine you're going to trade McCutchen, right?
No, I'm willing to say I think he's everything I've read, everything I've heard is he's staying here. It's just a question of whether he retires after this season or he,
you don't
does another year before going to the coaching staff.
You don't bring a guy like him back and then trade him. You just don't. That would be really ridiculous. The interesting thing in the 850-pound gorilla, actually that's a very small gorilla. Actually, the 8,500-pound gorilla in the room is Reynolds, and we should stress we're doing this on Wednesday. Let me just jump real quick here and let me see something just to make sure. But so far, there's been no news on Reynolds, right? I don't see any news on Reynolds. So full disclosure, we don't know what has happened with him right now. But if he doesn't sign a deal between now and, say, the opener, the first pitch, then what? He's a guy that probably could be, on the trading block when it comes to the trade deadline or whatever. Oh, or they could do what they've done, the last couple of years, which is just basically say we have him under contract, we're keeping him around. So, to me, I hear all these crazy theories about Brian Reynolds. I've heard people say, oh, the Pirates need to pay him X amount of dollars. There's a market that's already set. And, if you're going to tell me they're going to give him 6 years, say $120 million or somewhere in that neighborhood, $20 million, 6 years, by the end of his contract, it'll be 34. I might listen to that. But I think other people are losing their minds when they start talking about $25 million a year and give him an 8-year deal and all this other stuff. I'm sorry, but if you're the Pirates, you cannot tie up $25 million a year for Brian Reynolds. You just can't, especially not for 8 years where, his last 3 years will be 35, 36, 37 or whatever. 34, 35, and 36 his last couple of years. eight years, that's $200 million you're talking about. You can't really probably do that if you're the Pirates. The other interesting discussion is, do you approach O'Neal Cruz about a long-term deal? I would say you wait to the end of this year. Wait to make sure that what you're seeing, it's going to translate into him being a good baseball player over the long haul. I mean, people get all goo gaga about his launch angle and how fast he throws the ball from shortstop to first base. But clearly what we saw last year is a guy who has a lot of work to do on the actual fundamentals in terms of hitting and even fielding. And so before you are going to buy out all of his arbitration years and add a few years on and give him a big guaranteed deal, you probably should see him perform over a long stretch, right, before you go there. And so those are the questions that also are out there about the Pirates. Cruz, I don't think they'll offer a deal to until after the season. Then maybe they'll try and get him locked up. Reynolds, it's 50-50. But if he goes into the season without a contract being signed, then I would say he's in a lot. I would say that it's probably a lot more probable that he might not be here after the All-Star break. And as you said, that would affect their win-loss total.
I'm with you on the Reynolds contract, Paul. I'd rather see them spend more for a shorter time period than be on the hook for a longer one and kind of spread that money out. Because I think, even if you're 2-3 years into it and you want to move on from that contract, someone's going to want it if he's in his early 30s. I don't know if that'll be true when you get into his late 30s. So I'd rather have less term and more money. And then in terms of Cruz, I think I disagree with you a little bit in that the uncertainty is where you get better deals, right? You get, if you lock him down for a couple of free agent years, you have your shortstop of the future and you do so at a bargain rate compared to if he goes out and hits 35, 40 home runs this year, then he might be out of your price range by the end of the year. And so that's the only thing I'd say about Cruz is if the Reynolds thing doesn't happen, I think it puts pressure on them to make the Cruz extension happen. Because they'll probably save money compared to Reynolds, and you might have a lot more upside with that contract.
I get that, but I think that his agent would be silly to take, to take a bargain basement type of deal, or take the type of deal that you're talking about. I just don't know that would happen. It's one of those things where they know if he has one really good year here, okay, and the Pirates want to approach him with a contract, they're going to have to pay. Now, the good news is they have him under, 5 more years or something like that of control of him. So it's not like there's any pressure on them. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people forget in these baseball deals is that there's no pressure on them even to sign Brian Reynolds. I mean, don't they have him for 2 more years? Is it 2 more years after this year? I mean, there's no pressure to sign him, and even if you get to the point where you're at the trading deadline of his final season, okay, and you trade him as a rental so you don't get quite as much as you want. You're not giving him up. You're not giving him up for nothing, A. And B, you've used up all of, what you wanted to use up for him. At that point, he's 30 years old, 30 going on 31. You've gotten every ounce that you can get out of him, so you move on.
Yeah, I've always thought that was a fair outcome for Reynolds. I think it was more about the principle for me, which is I think segues nicely into our next Pirates topic, which is, Paul, the Forbes report came out this week and said the Pirates get $61 million from their television deal. That would put them mid-pack in baseball, certainly not at the bottom of the barrel as they like to talk about themselves, being a small market. They kind of shape up more as a mid-market, Paul, in terms of what they're actually getting paid and not, in terms of market size, because we know – one point I always try to make to people about the Pirates, Paul, is that this is a baseball town. This is a sports city. I think that even when they're bad, they get a lot more focus than teams in some of these Sunbelt cities with a lot of transplant people who just don't care about the local team as much. I think Houston's probably a good example of a market that has a lot of transplants that don't necessarily care about the Astros, so there's not as much buzz if they're good. Paul, what do you make of that Forbes report saying that the Pirates are probably making more than we're giving them scrutiny for?
It's not shocking to me, is it? It's not shocking to me because we've always kind of had a suspicion that the Pirates can do better in terms of in terms of what they're doing. they can actually do better. And we've kind of thought about that for a long, long time. And so to me, I just feel like it's one of those things where you just have to, go through and ask yourself where all this money has been going for these past few years. Where have they spent this money for the past few years? And the answer is they haven't, because they've been pocketing it. And I think one of the most eye-opening things about that Forbes article, Adam, was that the Pirates are 8th in revenue after what is that called, net revenue or whatever it is, revenue,
operating income.
8th after all of their bills are paid and this, that, everything. 8th. That tells you everything you need to know, that they can do better. They can do better than they have. So it doesn't surprise me, because we've always suspected this, haven't we? We've 100% always suspected this. And so to me, what's going to be interesting now, are they going to buy AT&T Sportsnet with the Penguins, or are they going to go to the subscriber model, or are they going to go to the streaming model? I mean, something's going to be different. From what I'm told, talking to people over at AT&T Sportsnet, it sounds to me like it's going to survive actually through the season. But at the end of the season, something different is going to go on. Something is going to happen in terms of how they find a local regional partner. It might be as simple as the Pirates buy into a cable situation or whatever, or they go in with the Penguins or whatever. But the fact that $61 million has been the number, that's a hell of a lot more than any of us thought. I mean, whenever I would talk about the Pirates, and I put together all the money that we kind of know about, the major league money, the revenue sharing, whatever money, the luxury tax that they, all that stuff, and the TV contract money, I always kind of thought, okay, let's say they get, I don't know, 15 million, 20 million from AT&T Sportsnet to throw on top of this. This is what their total is. Turns out we were all way, way low on that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's, it is what it is. Those numbers are in black and white, Paul. And, I said, if it's true that they're making 61 million, if you look around baseball, the Chicago White Sox are making 60 million on their deal. They have an $173 million payroll, Paul. So it's not inconceivable to say that the Pirates could. We talk about 100 million as the benchmark. It's not inconceivable to say that they could support a $200 million payroll, at least with this existing television deal. Now, where we go from here, maybe things do change. But I've also heard, Paul, that I wrote an article about this last week, that NESN, New England Sports Network, up in Boston, because they have that's owned by Fenway Sports Group as well. Perhaps Fenway Sports Group buys that up and strikes some kind of deal with the Pirates. I think that'd be interesting, because they actually have an in-market streaming option, which I think a lot of fans would love, because then they could cut the cord and just have the Penguins and Pirates, and maybe YouTube TV type of situation, save a lot of money on where they've been with cable. But those are some things to keep an eye on. Paul, we want to move on quickly to college basketball. As we're recording this on Wednesday, it looks like they just got to cross the T's and dot the I's on Mike Rhoades going to Penn State from Virginia Commonwealth. What do you think of that hire to replace Micah Shrewsbury?
You know what? I like it. And I'll tell you why I like it. I think that if you're Penn State, that's probably the level of coach you want to go try and get. A guy who's had success, in a pretty good league. I think people don't realize that the Atlantic 10, it was a one-bid league. I don't know that it should be a one-bid league, though, Adam. I think the level is a little bit higher than people probably give it credit for. But he's a guy, he's played in some Division I NCAA tournaments. He's led teams there, mostly in one-bid leagues. If you look at what he's done, he was at Rice for a little bit, and then he was at VCU. I think he's got some good experience. I think he's the kind of guy that you need at Penn State. But the one thing I will say about Penn State is, I don't know how. I guess if truly the deciding factor was going home, then there's nothing Penn State could have done to keep Micah Shrewsbury. But to me, one of the things that's really kind of annoying about Penn State is that, and I have some guests on my show from time to time who cover Penn State. It's that it's just not a priority. Like, people are saying, well, they made a last ditch effort and they offered him like $2.5–3 million a year or whatever. You know what? That's probably for a Big Ten coach. That's becoming probably the low end. And I think that if you think about think about the commitment they made to James Franklin and the facilities and the contract they gave him and all that other stuff. What's his name? Cale Sanderson, isn't that the wrestling coach, right? I mean, isn't he by far and away the highest paid wrestling coach in the country? And that's the reason that they were able to steal him from Iowa or Iowa State or wherever the hell he was at, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. This is a guy, they wanted to be good in wrestling. And guess what? They win national championships. They've tried in women's basketball. They really have. And, they went and got Coquise Washington. Didn't work out. It doesn't look like this one's working out either. But they've gone out and hired the right people. It's not like they've been cheap and not hired the right people. Now, I do think the next time they go about it, they should probably first take a look at some of these sitting Power 5 head coaches and throw a bunch of money at them and say, hey, you come to Penn State. This is a place where we do have women's basketball tradition, right? But there's some of the other sports. But men's basketball just doesn't seem to be that much of a priority. If they really wanted to keep Michael Shrewsbury, you say, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. Not just that, we're going to upgrade the facilities. What do you need to do? Is there some things we can do in our NIL coalition or whatever to make it so that we can go out and get players? That's how you keep your coach nowadays. And so it's frustrating because, as you know, Adam, because I think you've been to Penn State once or twice, as you know, I'm pretty sure that you walk down campus, right? And if there's if it's a brick road, I'm pretty sure they found a way to sell every one of those bricks to some donor. Like, nothing up there is not sponsored. Nothing up there doesn't cost money. The place is basically rolling in cash, regardless of what anybody wants to say about all of, all these schools crying poverty and this and that and the other thing. They've got the largest alumni base in the country.
In the world.
And they've got money. They've got resources. Whenever they need something, they get it, right? Whether it's new facilities, whether it's new fields, whether it's new buildings, whether it's new libraries, whatever, right? They get it because they've got the money to do it. So, the fact that Micah Shrewsbury walked tells me that despite all of these reports from the John Rothsteins of the world, Penn State did not do what it needed to do to keep him. But that being said, they got a pretty good coach, I think, and they brought him in here. But, why do you want to start over again? Why do you want you finally have a guy who clearly and here's the thing, he plays a style of basketball that kids want to play, right? He clearly is a guy who's going to be a good recruiter that's going to go out and get players, right? Why would you want to start over? But that's what they're doing. They're starting over essentially. And you've got, a guy who's now making the jump from the Atlantic 10 to the Big 10. There could be a little bit of an adjustment for that. It's frustrating because, as I say, Adam, and you and I talk about it from time to time, there are very few schools that I say this about, maybe 10 or 12 tops, but resources and money is not an issue at Penn State. They can do whatever they want to do. I mean, listen, I got cousins who are big time donors and season ticket holders and all that other stuff. I mean, the stuff that they get from Penn State, basically pushing for donations, and you know what, they give it. You know why? Because they want to keep their seats. They want to keep their their seats in the stadium for football. They want to keep their parking spaces. They want to do this. It's incredible. I mean, it's hard to explain that to people, but there is a lot of money up there. And I don't believe for a second that they really were all out, all in to try and keep Micah Shrewsbury, to do what you have to do nowadays to keep a coach.
Yeah, well, and I think, Paul, the big thing that a lot of people in Penn State world are talking about right now is the NIL stuff, and the way these donors, they'll say, "Oh, we don't want to start pay to play," but that's just the way it is now, Paul. You're going to have to do something in NIL to get basketball players, and it's really, I had a tweet the other day. I said they can get a guy to write a $120 million check for there to be a hockey arena, and that's fine, but a $50,000 NIL deal for a kid to play, for the basketball team is unseemly. Give me a break. They got to get over some of this Paterno era stuff. I think that it's the Paterno legacy that's kind of hanging over the place. Where he wouldn't have wanted to do NIL. I don't think that's true, because more than anything, he wanted to win, and I don't think he'd be sitting on his hands in this day and age if he were in his prime. And B, then what are you going to do? Lose? Is that what Penn State wants? And eventually, Paul, this conversation is going to go over to football. I think they're in a good position now. James Franklin has the guys that people want to play with. Those freshman running backs that are coming back next year want to play with Drew Aller. But they're going to end up in a position where they start to lose talent in football. Well, and I want to see the rubber meet the road at that point.
And I would just say this. One of the things about James Franklin, okay, you don't have to love James Franklin if you're a Penn State fan. You don't have to, think that, and I know some Penn State fans who don't think he's the best game day coach and all this other stuff. But in terms of being a CEO of a program and understanding modern college athletics, you've got the perfect guy. And I guarantee you, when he got his new contract or whatever last year, and I guarantee you a part of what he fought to make sure was that they were going to be competitive in some of these areas. You have to be competitive in. I mean, it's the way it is. And I think that, the administration at large needs to embrace, that this is the way college athletics are done. I mean, it bothers me so much that we spend so much time, people spend so much time bitching and moaning about NIL and transfers and this and that and the other thing. And guess what? I don't know that I love it, but I do know this. It's the way it is. And the coaches and the schools that figure it out are the ones that are going to have success. The ones that are still stuck, like you said, in an era long ago are the ones that are going to fall behind. And to me, this whole basketball thing with respect to Penn State, it's frustrating to me because it's like there's no reason why they shouldn't be good in basketball. And I hear people say, well, it's a state college is a tough place to get urban kids to come to. Well, okay, so, do we need to talk about how many black players there are on the football team? You only need like 4 or 5 really good players to have a good basketball program, number one. Number two, Pat Chambers has proved that you could go to Philadelphia and that's 2 hours away from State College or whatever it is. You can go there and get players. But the three, and more importantly, we just saw a team from, where are they from? Manhattan, Kansas, right? We just saw a team from Manhattan, Kansas get within an eyelash of the Final Four, right? Where is Kansas? What city is Kansas in, right? I can go on and on and on about the number of schools that have success in basketball that aren't in like the middle of an urban center. And so, for that matter, how many years? Syracuse went to 5 Final Fours from about 1988 till about 2015. They went to 5 Final Fours. They won a national championship. They always were, a really good team. In fact, they went 30 some years in 30 out of 31 years or something like that in the NCAA tournament. Have you ever been to Syracuse, New York? At the end of the day, if you have the right people in place, you have the right plan, and you embrace what college athletics have become, you can win in any sport you want to win in, period. I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, right? But I got to get this one off my chest because it's the same principle we're talking about, okay? Heather Lyke's done a wonderful job at Pitt, right? She's done a wonderful job at Pitt. But it grinds my gears when I hear people say, well, she's by far the best athletic director Pitt's ever had. Do you know what she's had? You know why she's been good? She's obviously good and knows what she's doing. But you know what has set her apart from the other athletic directors at Pitt? She hasn't had to pinch pennies. She's been in the ACC. People don't realize when Pitt was in the Big East, right? year after year after year after year in the Big East. At the end of every season, every conference hands every member a check, right? They split up all the revenues, the TV revenue, the bowl money, the NCAA tournament units, all of that stuff, right? They hand each other a check. They hand out a check, right? And they say, okay, this is what we made this year, right? We're splitting it 10 ways or 12 ways. When they were in the Big East, at the end of the year, that check was about $3 million to $3.5 million. That's what they got, right? Their bull money was very, very little. They got into the BCS a couple of times, or whatever. But for the most part, their bull money wasn't a bunch. They were in a lot of those minor bulls. Was their, was who they were aligned with, and those payouts weren't that much. They'd get some money from the NCAA tournament, but as you see, like the Big East this year, I think even though they have as many units as they have, I think each school is going to get about $3 million or something like that, $3.5 million. So at the end of the day, my point is, back in the day, and this isn't making excuses, but Jeff Long, Steve Peterson, all the guys who were ADs before this, they didn't have the ability to go out and sign. They wouldn't have been able to hire Jeff Capel away from Duke, because they couldn't have paid him $3.5–4 million or whatever it was that took him to go from a cushy job, right, as Coach K's top assistant, where there's very little pressure on you at all, basically, right, to taking a dumpster fire of a job. They wouldn't have been able to give him $3.5–4 million. Pat Narduzzi, they wouldn't have been able to extend him and keep him around after, after he started having some success and there was some interest in him. They wouldn't have been able to keep this Dan Fisher, the volleyball coach. They wouldn't be able to keep him around. Right? They wouldn't have been able to go out and hire the best soccer coach that was on the market when they wanted a soccer coach, right? They wouldn't have been able to do those things, right? Because it's about resources, it's about how you use your resources, and it's about money. So Heather Lake's done a great job, yes. But guess what? She gets about $40 million a year from the ACC. The other guys that were in the Big East got about 3. Now, I'm not a great at math, Adam, but that's more than 10 times, probably more than 12. Now, that's more than 13 times, right? Something like that. So that's a big part of all of this stuff. It takes money and resources to do it. And you can be good if you want to be good. And guess what? Now that Pitt has the money that they didn't have 10 years ago, now that they have the money to do it, it's amazing. All of a sudden, they're good. So Penn State could be good at basketball if they wanted to be good at basketball, but it clearly isn't a priority.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much where we are. Paul, before I let you go here, I want to ask about the column you wrote this week about the Final Four. You are not impressed by all the Cinderellas in the show. Explain that to our viewers and tell me what you're predicting here for how things are going to play out.
Okay, well, here's what I said, Adam. I like the Final Four to be the showcase of the best teams and the best players. I just do. I know, I feel like there's enough storylines for the first couple of weeks of the tournament where you've got these Cinderellas and, the Jerome Tangs of the world and this and that and everything. But when it comes to the Final Four, you know what I like doing on Saturday of the Final Four? Sitting down and watching 2 games featuring 4 teams that are all, really loaded with some top end talent, and we just letting them go and letting them play, right? I did a study of, I took 10 years or 25 years of the Final Four. This was probably 8-10 years ago, something like that. I was trying to find the article. I couldn't find it. Maybe it was even like 2008, something like that. I did a study, and really it was basically me saying one of the reasons why Pitt has not made the Final Four. Here's one reason why they've struggled. Of those 100 teams, I want to say about 95 of them had at least one first-round draft pick. And I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 91 of them had at least 2 NBA players, right? There were some Final Fours that I found that had, like 10, between the 4 teams, say, 8, 9, 10 NBA guys, maybe, a couple even more, whatever. And so that's what I've always been, it used to be when the Final Four, when you pick the Final Four, the NBA factor was an important factor when you were trying to figure out, okay, what teams am I going to pick? The NBA player factor was a big factor. Well, fast forward to now and the way things are different. Now we got a Final Four that has one guy projected to be a first-round pick, Jordan Hawkins from Connecticut, and a second guy who only a couple of mock drafts have as a late second rounder, and it's the other Connecticut kid, the junior. That's it. One NBA first rounder in this, and more alarming than that, for the first time ever, 0 McDonald's All-Americans. Now, there are some people that think that's a great thing. If that's what you want, I guess that's a great thing. But to me, this is why I say it all the time, Adam, and people get really angry when I say it. Football has it right, and basketball doesn't, because at least the 4 teams that are playing in the football Final Four are 4 really, 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 really good teams who have had elite seasons. And for the most part, you're going to see top-end NFL guys out there on the field. So you're going to see the best teams and the best, I think the NCAA tournament, because there's 68 teams and all the rounds and this and that, it lends itself to the little guy. But to me, the Final Four should be about the big guy. And when I say the big guy, I believe UConn is a blue blood, right? If UConn was one of the 4 teams, I'd be okay with it, because they do have a first-round NBA pick, because they are a team that's got some other guys that are probably going to have a chance to play in the G League and this and that and everything, right? Okay, if that's one team. But the problem is they're the only team. Florida Atlantic doesn't have anybody who's going to get drafted. Who else is in this thing? I'm trying to think who the other 2 teams are now. That's all. San Diego State. San Diego State, which I call the old man AAU team, right? I don't have. I mean, those guys are probably already ready for a retirement check. Most of those guys out there on San Diego State, and then of course San Diego State is going to play Florida Atlantic, and UConn is going to play Miami. Which Miami, getting back to our conversation about Shrewsbury, right? They went out and used NIL to lure a really, really important player in a very high profile NIL case. But at the end of the day, those guys are all kind of, a number of those guys are old and probably aren't going to get drafted either. So, Miami's kind of fun to watch, because they basically play almost like an AAU team, where they just run up and run and gun and don't worry about the defensive end so much. But I just feel like at the end of the day, I would rather see the best players. I would rather see more top-end talent in the Final Four than what we have this weekend. As for how it's going to play out, I'll be shocked if Connecticut doesn't win it. And frankly, if Connecticut doesn't win it, Danny Hurley will never win one, because this is a layup for him, isn't it? He's by far got the best team in this whole situation left, right? I mean, am I crazy?
I think Miami could give them a run for their money, but the spread was 5.5 today when I looked at it. I think it's a question of, is Miami going to make the shots they've been making this whole tournament? If they are, I think it'll be a good game. But I think on the base level, yeah, I think Connecticut's a better team. They'd be my pick as well. My only response, I guess, Paul, would be that I like to see the top-end talent in the Final Four. Completely agree with that. I just don't know that the top-end talent is on the best teams this year. And I think that's part of why the season played out the way it did, where there really were no runaway teams.
Well, here's one of the biggest things, Adam, if you think about it. Okay? All those mock drafts I looked at before I wrote the column, I would say roughly 16 out of the 30 first-round picks, maybe 17, 18, somewhere in that neighborhood, we're all freshmen. I mean, and as we've seen, it's getting increasingly hard to win with a number of freshmen, and I think the probably the biggest indicator of this is John Shire, right? Who had 4 guys projected to be in the top 22 draft, top 22 picks, 4 from Duke. They played against Tennessee and they got manhandled by a bigger, more physical, more mature team. And guess what? John Shire was talking about it a couple weeks ago, that their model is going to change. They're probably going to take a lot less high school players and start to go into the transfer portal, because it's just hard to beat experience. So to be honest with you, this is probably going to be a little bit more of a trend than I mean, say the other team that's got 3 or 4 guys that are projected in the top 25 is Alabama. They're all freshmen too. And so, it's hard to win with younger guys like that. The model will be probably a team like Duke, maybe they take 2 of those 5-star kids, right? And then they go get 2 or 3 of these 25-year-olds that are available, whatever they are. You know what I'm saying? And then they, have a couple of guys that they drafted that they developed, So when you look at their 8-man rotation, you've got 2 5-star kids, right? You've got 3 transfers who are all playing, who are all basically in their, 3rd, 4th, 5th year of basketball, right? And then you've got 3 or 4 guys that are foundation guys that have, been with you, and you've been basically grooming, and they're, you know what I mean? So you've got a rotation of 8 that has a lot of experience, and a lot of guys that are physically mature, but you also have a couple of those superstar freshman guys who, when you surround them with some older guys, they're not going to get pushed around and manhandled nearly as much as when there's 4 of them out there on the court.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to watch that where did the inefficiencies land, but I think that's a good point, is some of these top teams probably just have to even things out a little bit better. Paul, wanted to get into some hockey, but I think we're running out of time today. We had plenty of hockey talk earlier this week. We had Emily Kaplan of ESPN. We also had Andrew Destin on Wednesday on the North Shore Drive with Christopher Carter. So if you're looking for some hockey talk, check that out. Paul, any final thoughts?
No, I think we've gone a long way to cover all the ground. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for stopping by, Paul. We'll look forward to talking to you next week. And everyone else, happy opening day. Enjoy the baseball.
We'll see you.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.